All right. The final lightning talk that we have before the second panel is Ron Rothblum from Succinct with a cheeky titled lecture on the insecurity of Fiat-Shamir. Ron Rothblum. Thanks.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Ron Rothblum. I'm a cryptographer at Succinct. And I want to talk to you about security today, and specifically about one aspect of security that we tend to take somewhat for granted, and I'm personally a little bit worried about, and that's known as Fiat-Shamir. So I want to kind of start the presentation with this very famous quote by Silvio Micali, who is a very famous cryptographer who, among other things, co-invented zero-knowledge proofs and snarks, that cryptographers seldom sleep well. And the reason for that is that all of what we do in cryptography, almost all of what we do in cryptography, relies on assumptions, which we believe to be true, but we're not sure. So we have to keep sort of one eye open when we're asleep to make sure that nothing broke. And zooming in on ZK VMs, we're making a few cryptographic assumptions, and I want to kind of highlight what they are, and kind of then zoom in on one of them. So first thing I want to mention is this notion of proximity gaps, with Arantxa mentioned earlier in her talk. This is a conjecture that most teams rely on. I'm happy to report that at Succinct, as of this week, we're proving in real time without making this conjecture. So I'm sleeping a little bit better. So kind of happy about that. Second thing we rely on are hash functions that are collision resistant, meaning that it's hard to find collisions in these hash functions. This is a very, very standard cryptographic assumption. Ethereum relies on it. All of us rely on it on a day-to-day basis. Not particularly worried about that. The third one is Fiat-Shamir, which I want to talk about today, so I won't go into it yet. And the fourth one, which I won't have time to go into, is about recursion. So if you're interested, ask me offline about that. So I want to go into Fiat-Shamir. So what is Fiat-Shamir? So it's this beautiful idea invented by Amos Fiat and Adi Shamir almost 40 years ago in this beautiful paper. And what it lets you do is basically design interactive protocols, so back and forth interaction, but then magically make them non-interactive, which is kind of huge. And their original idea was to do this to construct digital signature schemes, but nowadays we're going far beyond that and using them to construct snarks. And almost all snarks rely on this idea. Cool, so what is the idea in this transform? So we go from an interactive proof generically into a non-interactive proof. And the idea, very briefly, is as follows. So we start off with an interactive protocol, say, for example, something like Fry. So we have a prover P and a verifier V, and they interact. They send messages back and forth. And we're going to make an assumption here that the messages that the verifier sends are just like random messages. And it turns out that for the protocols that we actually care about, this is indeed the case. So we have an interactive protocol, but interaction is no good, right? We want to post our proofs on chain. We don't want to go back and forth. And what Fiat-Shamir lets us do is kind of replace this interaction by a hash function. So the idea is to build a new interactive protocol in which, so you can emulate the first prover message easily, you just run the interactive prover. But then rather than wait for the verifier to respond with its random challenge, you derive the random challenge by hashing the message that you just produced. Okay, using that, you can generate the next challenge and go so on and so forth and generate all of the challenges and therefore the entire proof. So this is the beautiful Fiat-Shamir transform. It's very simple when I present it this way. Actually doing it in code turns out to be more challenging, and this is very well known to have a lot of implementation bugs. But that's not the focus of my talk. So I want to focus on doing Fiat-Shamir as you're supposed to, and what happens then. And you might say, if you do Fiat-Shamir as you're supposed to, then it's really, really well battle tested. We've been using Fiat-Shamir in signature schemes for a very long time. Okay, so why am I losing sleep over this? Well, the reason is that the way we use Fiat-Shamir nowadays is very different than the traditional way in which it was used to build signature schemes, in particular because we're now proving general-purpose computations using Fiat-Shamir. And that worries me. And the reason why it worries me, a word about soundness. So why is it intuitively sound? Well, because the verifier's challenges are derived via hash, they seem unpredictable to the prover. So it seems to emulate the interactive case. And in cryptography, we're not satisfied with intuition. We want more of an analysis. So we've known for about 30 years now that Fiat-Shamir is secure if you think of the hash function as purely random function. Okay? And this is commonly interpreted as saying, if you have an attack against Fiat-Shamir, it means your hash function is not behaving as well as expected, switch your hash function. So that's a common interpretation, but actually this interpretation has been challenged. So Sequence of Works showed that there are examples of sound interactive protocols, but if you apply Fiat-Shamir to them, they are totally broken. So this looks very alarming, but for a long time, no one really cared so much because the protocols that we had here, these examples, were convoluted. They were sort of contrived protocols that were intentionally designed to fail. So people were not particularly worried. I think something changed a little bit in this work that we had earlier this year. This is with collaborators, so Dmitry Kuvertovich and Lev Sukhanov, both were at the EF at the time. I think Lev maybe has left since then. And in this work, we showed that there's actually an attack against a real-world protocol, a variant of GKR, that is very common and popular, and this affects real-world systems. So this is an example of a PR by Polyhedra giving a particular fix or mitigation against our attack. So this is very much real-world. So given this attack, where do we stand in terms of security, and what worries me so? So proximity gaps, we know we can avoid them. Arancha already said we have to, so great about that. In the worst case, if we're not able to prove stronger bounds, we'll get a 2x improved size. Not ideal, but also not the end of the world. Collision resistance, as I said before, doesn't worry me too much. In the very unlikely event that someone finds collisions in Poseidon, we'll switch to a different hash function. We have a very, very good understanding about collision resistance of hash functions, so that, again, does not worry me so much. Recursion overhead, I didn't have a lot of time to speak about that. Worst case, we'll do less recursion. Maybe we'll do no recursion. We could work with steaming provers. This, again, is in the worst case, in case something is broken. The one place where we don't really have a fix is Fiat-Shamir. Okay, so we have examples of real-world protocols in which if you do Fiat-Shamir, they are entirely broken no matter what hash function you use. And if we had a similar attack against protocols that run in ZK VMs, we would have a problem. So that worries me. I don't think this event is very likely, but it's very, very risky because we don't have a backup plan. So just to summarize, I really view the Fiat-Shamir security that we're assuming in snarks to be a new or different cryptographic assumption. I don't think we can just rely on the fact that Fiat-Shamir has been used in a different way for many years. The fact that we have the random oracle analysis is maybe good, but it's not enough because we also know that there are attacks, concrete attacks, that are not captured by this random oracle analysis. So my conclusion, Fiat-Shamir it's an assumption, and I think we're sort of taking it for granted, and we need much more research about it. I can report to you that there's a line of work more in the theory community from which I come, trying to instantiate Fiat-Shamir provably, and we've made a lot of progress here, but there's still a lot more to be done. So I think there may be some hope in the long run to use this line of work, but we still have plenty to do. Okay, so I'll end the talk here and happy to take questions.
Thank you, Ron. We've got a question from the audience. So are there any hardness assumptions on the hash function that make Fiat-Shamir probably secure in a specific real-world protocol, in specific real-world protocols?
Yeah, so for the way we're using them in ZK VMs, the answer is no. There is an assumption known as correlation and tractability, which sort of partially suffices. It would suffice for certain types of protocols, which this line of work deals with. But the short answer is no. The assumption is that Fiat-Shamir of this protocol is secure.
Great. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Okay.